Wrong button. Right, good morning, everybody. Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of the Cabinet Member Decision Day taking place from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 10:30. My name is Councillor Neil Cutler, Deputy Leader and Chairperson for this meeting. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded to the Council's YouTube channel. Subtitles are available and advice on how to turn this on is set out on our website. If you're joining us online, please turn your camera and microphone off until your item. Can everyone please ensure mobile phones are on silent? In the unlikely event that it's necessary to evacuate, the building fire alarm will sound. Please follow all instructions given to you by our team. Please can I welcome members of the public to the meeting. I will invite you forward when it's time to make your contribution. Now, turning to the agenda, agenda item 2 is public participation, and we have Mr. Ian Tate. I will invite him to speak actually after we've had the introduction to the paper. Item 3, we're visiting councillors, Councillor Godfrey. Similarly, I will invite him forward when we move after the introduction to the paper. So item 4 is the decision to be made, which is the report title Additional Financial Support for Hampshire Cultural Trust, and the decision is that will be considered is that one-off additional support grant of 81,300 to Hampshire Cultural Trust to meet an extraordinary rise in cost and expenditure be approved, and that the 81,300 from the exception is taken from the exceptional inflation earmark reserve to fund the grant award. I will ask Mrs. Robbins to introduce the paper and the explanation for the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and good morning, everybody. So by brief introduction and a reminder that since 2014, Hampshire Cultural Trust has run and operated our museums and cared for our collections of artefacts and historic finds. The Trust is an independent charity with a board of trustees on which the council does have a seat. All the services that are delivered for the council by the trust is managed under a number of contractual agreements, including the management and funding agreement, and with an annual payment for these services from the council. We are a founding partner of the trust along with Hampshire County Council. It's under this agreement that the trust approached the council in February, requesting our consideration of the financial position excuse me, brought about by the cost of living crisis, inflation and rising costs. Under the contractual agreement, the council is obliged to consider this request, and there are 3 clauses particularly that have been cited and explained in the report. Following that request, we undertook an examination of the financial case. We requested further detailed support that business case, and we went into negotiations with the trust. We looked for mitigations to the rising costs that they had undertaken themselves, and we know that that has included restructuring staff resources. We also undertook discussions with Hampshire County Council as a founding partner, so that we were aware of the requests. In recognition of the services provided by the Hampshire Cultural Trust, and in conclusion of the reviews and negotiations, it is considered appropriate to offer an additional funding grant to meet this particular situation, and that is to be paid this financial year. However, that is on the basis that certain clauses within the management funding agreement are removed, and this is in particular relation to clause 5.8, which is staff costs, and that no further grant assistance will be made in the period up until March 2026. Therefore, it is recommended that the grant of 81,300 be offered, and that this be funded from the exceptional inflation reserve. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tate, would you like to come forward and make your comments? Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to address this meeting regarding the proposal to award the Hampshire Cultural Trust a grant of £81,300. My reason for wishing to speak today is that last April 2022, I approached the Trust about a potential business venture which could have potentially generated them in excess of £20,000 income for the Trust each year with no financial input from them and very little management time. Although initially I received a constructive response from one of the trustees who I happened to know, subsequent to that, it became clear that the Trust didn't even want to talk or meet myself and my business partner. No interest whatsoever. I fully understand that the core activities of the Trust are the maintenance and promotion of our cultural heritage. However, with tightening budgets, I believe that it is essential that all public bodies have some understanding and sense of how they can become more financially robust and independent. Yesterday, I paid my £6.50 annual fee to visit the Winchester Museum, which I enjoyed. However, the museum offers a very inadequate display of the incredible history of Winchester. I knew Roger Brown quite well and commended him for his excellent model, but for a small museum, the display dominates the ground floor and precludes many other important items being displayed. We've got the very pared back Foster's the Tobacconist. Bosley's has gone, a shop I knew from my youth. Hunt's the Chemist, very little there. I don't really know what the museum is all about and what it's trying to achieve. I strongly supported the art school taking over the old River Park Leisure Centre and spoke at Cabinet to that effect, as I feel that a well-managed area around River Park Leisure Centre could offer some excellent space to relocate the City Museum, thus freeing up this wonderful building to be repurposed, for an example, as a restaurant, which would generate income of between £100,000 and £150,000 a year. I know that there are a number of well-known national chains who've tried to explore this opportunity, but have been brushed off. We must remember that Abbey Mill, another historic building, was turned into a restaurant at the time with Hugh Fernley Whittingstall. In a climate of tightening budgets, it is essential that public bodies adapt to changing circumstances, and rather than coming cap in hand to the hard-pressed council, they think of ways of generating new income streams. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tate. Councillor Godfrey, please. Thank you.
Mr. Tate's consistency on the Roger Brown model is heartwarming. The formation of the Hampshire Cultural Trust 9 years ago was an elegant solution to a significant challenge for the City Council. How do we maintain our extensive historic collection when finances are being continually squeezed? The annual cost of supporting our 3 museums and collection storage facilities at that time was around £750,000. With inflation, that would be over £1 million today. By passing over the function to the Hampshire Cultural Trust, that cost is less than half what it used to be, and the offering to the public is improving every year. I'm delighted that the Deputy Leader is considering this proposal to maintain the arrangement with the Trust. However, the report and Ms. Robbins' oral update does not state whether the proposed level of additional funding is sufficient to allow the Trust to continue its upward trajectory of improvements, nor what the implications are for a Trust of making this a one-off payment rather than a recurring increase. Most of the funding is to meet the extra costs caused by inflation. Does the Deputy Leader expect these salaries and costs to come down next year or the year after if no further additional payments are made before 2026? Will staffing levels in the Trust have to reduce further due to the funding arrangements with the City Council? Increasing recurring support was not one of the options considered according to this report. Why not? Today's report does not give much detail about the challenges facing the Trust, nor what other bodies have done to resolve them. Has the County Council responded to the request for additional funding? Has the Trust been successful in funding increases from other funding bodies or from sponsorship? Has it even made such applications in recent months? What is the decision that you are really being asked to make today? Is it to fill a temporary hole in the Trust's budget, or fix what is going to be a long-term existential challenge for our museum service? If it is the latter, based on what is in the paper, I can only assume that you are under pressure to abandon funding of the Hampshire Cultural Trust at a sustainable level. Short-term funding can only lead to the rapid decline of the services offered by the Trust. I support continued funding of the Hampshire Cultural Trust, but it must be within a framework of long-term funding, not forcing this important organisation to live hand to mouth. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. I think if we first address the comments from Mr. Tate, I think in the context of this response, we are looking purely at the finances. Councillor Thompson is our cabinet member responsible for the trust in broader sense, and he's a trustee of the trust. So it's one of the reasons why I'm taking the decision rather than she is. But I think the context and detail of your presentation, probably if you could forward it to her, I think it would be useful for her to see and hear. But I just asked Mrs. Robbins if she's got any comments on because I know that she's been in very detailed discussion about adaptation to the future, and she may well have some answers.
Thank you, Councillor. And in response, I think we will be working very closely with Hampshire Cultural Trust in the coming months and over the next year or so to consider their business strategy and how they are looking at what they offer. And so I think, as mentioned, those comments and views, I think, should feed into that through Councillor Thompson. But yes, that's something that we want to work with the Trust about their business strategy going forward. Thank you.
Turning to Councillor Godfrey's comments, the implication that we're under pressure to abandon funding, I think, is incorrect. We are fully supportive of Hampshire Cultural Trust, and if you remember, the process for funding, I think deals in 3-yearly tranches, and has generally been a declining in funding with the aim of them becoming relatively self-sufficient, not entirely, obviously. But in the budget of last February, the funding for this 3-year period, because of the inflationary pressures and the pressures from COVID, was not cut. So we continued to maintain the level of funding that we'd had before, and this is on top of that. And I know that Hampshire County Council have been proportionate. The agreement is proportionate with Hampshire County Council's extra funding as well. Clearly, from the council's point of view, there was a request and that request was looked at in great detail by both Hampshire and by both Winchester City Council, and this was the figure that was finally agreed on. As I say, the funding runs through at a level period till 2026, and then will be reviewed again. So I wouldn't say that there is a lack of commitment, but we do recognise the difficulties they've had. Mrs. Robbins will presumably add to that in far more detail than I can.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not sure about more detail, but I did want to just add a couple of other points, that the Trust does look for other grant income and does seek that out and apply for it. You'll be aware that they had some MPO funding to support some of their activities across the district, across the county, and they do look at income generating activities as well. So they are looking at how they can increase their funds, and as I say before, they also look at how they can mitigate those costs. With regards to salary costs, and that is one of the clauses that we do want to look at, that is correct, so that that isn't a future burden to the council. However, staffing numbers and how they structure the organisation as an independent trust is for them to decide. In consultation with us, but it is as an independent organisation, their right to do that. Thank you.
I think one of the things I want to add is that I'm sure Councillor Godfrey was involved in the process of setting up the Hampshire Cultural Trust, and I think one of the reasons behind making it an independent organisation was, and a charitable organisation, was this ability to take funds from elsewhere. And you're quite right to point out what the cost would be, or what the cost was, and what the cost is would likely to be if we had to take all our collections and the museums back in hand. So I'd like to emphasise that, you know, our support is that there is no question that we're considering withdrawing from it, but at the same time, it's our, you know, we have a strong responsibility to not just hand over money without detailed negotiations. And I think Mrs. Robbins has done a very good job of understanding and negotiating along with Hampshire County Council, so that there is a proportionate figure that we feel is the right figure for them now. There is this balance to be struck all the time between wanting to support an organisation, but actually making sure that they are well run, and I think we've struck that balance. Obviously, when the 2026 funding regime, or the next 3-year tranche, comes along, there will be further detailed discussions and to understand their position and to safeguard our position of our collections. So we believe that this grant will be sufficient for them as to help with their restructuring, along with what Hampshire County Council are a considerably larger sum that Hampshire County Council will be bringing to them. So I'm quite content with the decision, but I'd like to invite either of you to comment further if you'd like to. I know that's slightly outside of protocol, but just quite happy for a further comment.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I'm reassured by the explanation and additional detail on the basis for funding. My understanding, what you said, is that increasing the 3-year settlement by this £81,000 amount, it makes the next 3 years sustainable, and what happens after that is subject to further negotiation. And that the County Council have agreed a similar formula in line with that. And I'm Yes, I was not aware of that rationale. So I think it is useful to have that information. What I'm continue to be concerned with is it enough to get that the squeeze on the trust to do better financially, and from a business perspective. We heard Mr. Tate was concerned about that awareness and the best use of our assets is something which I think will be a continuing challenge for officers, and I would offer my full support to them in achieving the best for the museum service. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your support. Mr. Tate, did you want to say anything?
Thank you, Chair. I think I've made my point. I will liaise with Councillor Thompson. I do actually have quite a strong interest in culture and heritage, and we're blessed in Winchester with some incredibly knowledgeable people. And I think the disappointing thing is that the space available to the city to display our various collections is not even an iceberg. We probably just scratch a few percent of the surface of what we've got, and I just don't think that the Westgate Museum is a different kettle of fish, but the City Museum as a principal building to display our collections is inadequate. And I would just like to think the trust can be much more radical and working in partnership with the city, trying to find available space. But I'm grateful for your opportunity to allow me to follow up, and I do want to celebrate what the trust does as a Winchester citizen. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. As I said, as we've agreed, I think talking to Mrs. Robinson and Councillor Thompson on your views on that would be very, very helpful. Having considered the discussion and the paper, and recognising that a great deal of work has gone into reaching the correct figure, I think that would be. I'm happy to agree this decision that a one-off additional support grant of £81,300 goes to the Hampshire Cultural Trust to meet an extraordinary rise in cost and expenditure, and also that this is funded from the exceptional inflation earmark reserve. So I'm happy to approve those two decisions. I think that concludes the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody.